real parents, real stories. It's the Meet the Parents podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 34 of the Meet the Parents podcast for another 30 or so minutes of chat from some of your favourite parent bloggers. I'm Tim from Slouching Towards Thatcham, and this evening I'm going to be talking with Hannah from Budding Smiles and Mark from Best Dad I Can Be. Good evening, both of you.
Hi, Tim.
So on this week's podcast we're going to talk about Michael Gove. Scandal or storm in a teacup? Now, it's probably safe to say that former Secretary of State for Education and Justice Michael Gove is not at the top of many people's lists of favourite politicians of all time. But last week, he came under fire from a number of different media outlets when it was revealed that he and his wife left their 11-year-old son at a guest house hotel at his own request and after staff agreed to keep an eye on him. It drew obvious comparisons with both the film Home Alone and, of course, the tragic case of Madeleine McCann, although, in truth, those comparisons are pretty simplistic. I mean, Madeleine McCann was 3 rather than 11 for starters, and Gove's son isn't Macaulay Culkin. Or at least I hope not. But anyhow, there's been a lot of opinion on both sides of the argument, spanning everything from, what's the big deal, to Gove should be ritually disemboweled and then slow roasted over a low heat for 12 hours. Seeing as everyone else has been talking about it, we thought we would too. So let's start with the legal position on leaving kids without parental care. Now, in the UK, there isn't actually a legal minimum age for leaving a child alone, although it can be considered a crime if to do so places them at risk of harm. So, according to the NSPCC's guidelines, they say that under 12s are rarely mature enough to be left for long. But that's a guideline, nothing more. And in essence, the law is deliberately vague, and it puts the decision in the hands of parents to determine whether it's safe to leave a child and how long for, depending on individual circumstances such as where you are and how responsible and mature the child is. So what do we think? Are we comfortable that there's no rigid law in place for a parent's duty of care when leaving a child?
Yes, I am absolutely comfortable with that. In my view, the more things that can be left to a parent's common sense and judgment without the law intervening, the better.
Yeah, and of course the danger is, isn't there, that common sense often proves to be anything less than common. But what do you think, Hannah?
I agree. I don't think that the law should be micromanaging parents, so to speak, and children are very different from one another. So whereas even two children to the same parents, one might be perfectly okay to be left on their own at, say 12, and the other one, they wouldn't even consider it until they were 15. So I think it does have to be down to the parents to make that judgment call at the end of the day.
I think when you're talking about issues where child safety is directly involved, so I'm thinking about things like car seat regulations and so on, I think it does make sense to have some clear legal guidelines in place. But for something like this, you can't legislate for every different possible scenario, can you? And there's a real danger, I think, in applying an arbitrary age limit when, one parent might have a very mature and responsible 8 or 9-year-old, while another, say, has, an 11 or 12-year-old who has, diminished mental or physical capabilities. And, the latter case clearly would need a lot more care than the former. But it does leave a massive grey area, doesn't it, which can leave a parent's judgment open to criticism, as has been the case with Gove. So I don't know Michael Gove from Adam, to be honest, but let's talk about our own experiences of this. So Mark, I mean, your kids are much older than mine and Hannah's. So what age were they when you first left them at home on their own, and how long did you leave them for?
Do you know, Tim, I've been thinking about this for a couple of days now. I honestly can't remember. I think You made the point in your initial email that you might well have left one of your eldest for 15 minutes just to zip out to the shops or to collect your wife from the station. I suspect the same was true for us. I think the point that Hannah made, that your children are all very different, is very true. I think that if I look at our three, that they matured at different ages, and I would have left one of them quite happily on their own at 11, whereas perhaps, Dan, the eldest, was perhaps slower to mature, and I probably wouldn't have done that with him. But I think, thinking back, I suspect it was the same as you, that you said, look, just sit on your computer, watch the TV. You know as well as I do that actually if a child is engrossed in a TV programme, you could actually be gone for half an hour, even longer, quite easily, and they won't move from the settee.
And not only that, they'll barely even notice.
Especially a teenage boy, providing he's got a regular supply of food, it can be there for several hours. As long as he can work through 6 or 8 packets of biscuits, he's fine.
That is an interesting social experiment, isn't it? Leave a child alone and see how long it takes for them to notice that you're not there.
Yeah.
Thinking back to when you were a child, can you remember how old you were when you were first left on your own?
I really can't. I grew up on an estate in Peterborough, and it was a nice estate. There were a lot of families with kids my age and my brother's age that we went to school with. So I can remember being probably sort of 9 or 10, I guess, and being allowed to go to someone's house on my own. And now I know full well that my mum would have phoned their mum and said Hannah's on her way, and then their mum would phone back and say yep, she's here. But I can't really remember at what point I was left at home on my own. I recall I broke my collarbone when I must have been about 8 or 9 years old. And I was off school because there was concerns, right at the beginning, whilst it was first healing, about if I got jostled in the playground or something. And I can remember my mum nipping out to the shops and saying to me, now, you're not allowed to go outside on your roller skates. And she came back probably only 10 or 15 minutes later to find me inside on my roller skates, making the perfectly valid point that she'd only told me not to go out in them. So I must have been left on my own around sort of the 8-9 years old for short periods of time, but I think I was quite a responsible child. I don't know, I should have done the same maybe for my brother, I'm not sure.
And how about you, Mark? Were you a similar kind of age when you were first left on your own?
I certainly didn't go around on my roller skates because I didn't, I had the sense of balance of a fridge magnet. But I do remember playing football in the lounge. I used to, so I'd be about 12 when I did that. I used to set set the settee up as a goal, and I'm sure as many small boys did, or medium-sized boys did. I just had a game of football till my mum came in from work. So I would, probably when I was 11 or 12, I came home from school and let myself in. And I think my mum came in from work about half an hour later, something like that.
I reckon I was probably a similar age to you, Hannah. I was probably about 8. So basically, the same kind of age that Isaac is now when I was first left at home on my own. In that case, my mum used to go and she'd pop out for 10 to 15 minutes to pick up my dad from the station in the evening. So it wasn't like I was being left at home for very long. And, like we were joking earlier, I'm not sure I barely noticed. I'd be sat down in front of the TV and left to myself for 10 or 15 minutes. And then kind of similar to you, Mark, I think certainly when I started secondary school, I had my own key. I'd get the bus home from school, I'd let myself in, and I'd probably be on my own for, maybe an hour or so. And that was never really an issue. Although thinking about that, I do remember that I was probably as young as 5 or 6, and I used to spend a few hours at a time just in the house, not alone, but unsupervised during school holidays, because my mum worked night shifts, so I'd be left to play on my own while she slept in the next room. So I wasn't home alone as such, but certainly trusted enough not to go wandering up the road to the shops or anything like that. So do we think that the situation's any different now for our kids than what it was for us? Because I can remember that I used to go up the road to play at a friend's house, and I'd be trusted enough to walk back, and I was probably only about 7 at that point. I'm not sure necessarily that we would have done the same for Isaac, although in our case, popping to a neighbour's house is literally just popping round the corner, so it's not quite the same. But do we think that things are different now? Are we more conscious or more aware of the potential pitfalls and dangers of letting our kids out on their own?
I think that the big thing for me is my kids are being older, is I seem to do far more taxiing around. We have 2 cars. We only had 1 car when I was growing up. I seem to do far more taxiing around. My kids seem to spend much less time walking, on the bus, cycling than I did as a child. That's the big difference that I notice.
I certainly was allowed to walk around a lot more when I was certainly 8, 9, 10 than perhaps we've allowed the boys to. Although, we do often kind of walk into town together. I'm quite keen on making sure that we don't assume that we're getting in the car even just to go half a mile into town. But yeah, actually letting them out on their own. I think maybe we're just a bit more aware that traffic on the roads is much heavier than it used to be, and we're slightly more conscious of dangers like that. Hannah, have you got a view in terms of how you would make the decision about leaving Toby and Martha on their own? Obviously not something that's going to be happening in the near future, but obviously a decision you and Phil will come to one day.
Yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it? Where we live, we're sort of in the countryside, but we're not so far in the countryside that our nearest neighbour is 5 miles away. We are on a residential street, and so from that point of view, I've got a good friend of mine whose daughter's only 6 days older than Toby, and she is only a 5-minute walk down the hill from us, but it does require crossing a 60-mile-an-hour road. So it's a bit difficult, and I don't know. I think I like to think that Phil and I would just think, yes, Toby's responsible enough now, but looking at him as a rampaging 2-year-old who, if anyone reads my blog, they may have seen a couple of months ago, he did manage to get out of the front door, and I did find him wandering down the road, much to my absolute horror and terror. I just can't really imagine it at the moment, but I suppose as he matures, and we'll just have to play that by ear. I guess it's quite a difficult one when they're so little to even imagine them having that sort of level of responsibility. And because Toby is so hyperactive, he just does not stop. I can't imagine being able to just sit him in front of the telly and know that he wouldn't move, because he's just always on the go. And I think one of the downsides of us living in the countryside, you've got the plus side that there are fewer sort of busy main roads, but the downside is that when they do get onto a road, I find that people drive like idiots because they think they've got the roads to themselves, or you've got the likes of big tractors and farm machinery that maybe wouldn't notice a child as easily if they kind of didn't pay attention and wandered out into the road. So I don't know, it's a very difficult one. I'm not sure how I'll feel about it or how I'll know.
Yeah, and of course, that's a big decision that's quite a long way in the future from your perspective. But there were lots of intermediate little decisions that you make along the way, aren't you, that are either you've made already or that are imminent. It's things like deciding when it's time to move a child from a cot into a bed, or the one that always sticks in my mind was the momentous decision to finally remove all the stair gates, which was a wonderful day in our household.
Yes.
Tim, it's only about a year and a half ago that I took the child locks off the cupboards. Was
that just because of your chocolate stash?
Yeah, well, my wine stash. But wait until they get older and they start complaining about the wine that you're serving them. I just got so used to kind of putting my hand in and flicking this latch as the way to open the cupboards that I just never got round to it. But I think what Hannah's saying. I think it's like so many decisions as a parent. You actually make the decision quite gradually, and suddenly it seems the right thing to do. And I think you're so busy mastering the particular age that they're at, whether they're 6 months or 2 years or 5, and they've just started school, that actually you tend not to think about what's coming up in 4 or 5 or 6 years' time, because you've always got enough to be worrying about at the particular moment, without thinking what's going to happen next.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, I think. It's these aren't often kind of big, momentous days where you suddenly wake up one morning and go, right, today's the day. It's often a decision that's made over a period of time when you finally actually get round to remembering to unscrew something or to do things. Now, I should probably make clear as well that the decision to remove the stairgates in our household was taken on a day when the kids decided it was safe for me to go up and down the stairs unaccompanied.
Yeah. Don't Tim, don't joke about that, okay? Don't joke about that, because a couple of mornings last week, I gave Alex a lift to college, and one of them I forgot to turn the gas off before we went out. I left the gas on low. It was still on when we came in at 4:30, and he was on the point of getting social services to take me into care. So don't joke about that, because pretty soon Isaac will be turning around and asking if you're all right.
I think he does that already. Yeah. You move from taking the stair gates down one day to having the stair lift put in the next.
Yeah. Don't even joke about it.
But yeah, I mean, there are lots of these kinds of decisions, aren't they? Where it's not just the decision to leave our kids home alone. It's removing of stair gates, and there are countless little decisions that we make along the years as parents, aren't there? When we have to decide that it's time to let the kids off the leash a bit and give them the opportunity to start taking responsibility for themselves, because everyone has to grow up and stand on their own 2 feet at some point, don't they?
From my own experience, the thing I will say is that the more responsibility you give your children, the better. My children are quite happy to act like children or young adults or teenagers or whatever stage they've been at. When there's been something important and they've really had to behave and be responsible, whether it's been family occasions, anything like that, they always stepped up to the plate. Children are capable of much more than we often give them credit for, I think.
Yeah, and one thing that I've found, and I assume you're probably quite similar, Mark, and I'm sure Hannah, you and Phil will discover over the next few years, is that actually when you give kids responsibility like that, they do absolutely step up to the mark, and they take real pride in the fact that they're being recognised as being a little bit more mature, and they're allowed to do things that they weren't allowed to do 3 months ago, and so on.
So where do we stand on Michael Gove? Do we think his son should take responsibility for him?
I think someone should.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I think for me, part of it, I mean, I don't know Michael Gove's son or anything like that. I'm not sure how I'd feel about the fact that he was left in a hotel room. I think when they're at home, it just seems like there's more, if you don't want them going out wandering, but you don't trust them enough to have a key or something, then you could essentially lock them in and have a neighbour look out for them. I mean, he said the staff was, they had staff members looking out to make sure he was okay, but they could have been called away or anything like that. And he could have just walked out of the hotel door. I don't know, maybe that's me looking at it with the view of a parent who's got much younger children. I've not reached anywhere close to the 11-year mark, so I can't really judge it from that situation. All I could think when I first read it was, okay, he might be very responsible, but even responsible 11-year-olds do get distracted or do get bored, and I guess my concern would have been that he could have easily just wandered out of that hotel and maybe not have been spotted and nobody would have noticed. But as I say, maybe that's just me being a bit overcautious, because currently I'm only the parent to a 6-month-old and a rampaging 2-year-old.
And I guess maybe it's the fact that that the boy is 11 years old that makes the debate so divided, doesn't it? Because opinion has been really divided on this, and I think if you're talking about a 13 or 14-year-old, I think the debate swings very much in one direction. If you're talking about a 7 or 8-year-old, again, it swings completely in a different direction. But when you're talking about an 11-year-old who, let's face it, none of us really know, how mature he is, how responsible he is, how trusted he is by his parents. It's really difficult to judge. And they're I think at that kind of age, 10, 11, they're right in that grey area, aren't they? Where it's really difficult to know whether he was responsible.
There's a couple of points I'd make there. Is a 13 or 14-year-old, would you leave him for 6 hours in a hotel room? I wouldn't, no, because I'd worry about two things. Number one, I'd worry about the minibar, and number two, I'd worry about the porn channel. And I say that in all seriousness, that an 11-year-old boy would not think about either of those two things. I think looking back, they probably wouldn't. But at 13 or 14, that I would say there's a strong possibility of that.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair, and I guess that's it's a slightly different angle, isn't it, on the same decision, where at 13 or 14 they're almost certainly going to be responsible enough to look after themselves, and probably a little bit too capable of looking after themselves.
Yeah, that's the whole point. Yeah, I mean, your children go through a period where they are responsible, but then you start to worry about, well, what else might go on, I think it's a bit simplistic to say at 13 or 14 everything would be fine. I think there are dangers at any age.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair point, but I guess it always amazes me how quickly, where we're talking in this case about an 11-year-old boy, how quickly people jump to snap judgments about whether it was the right thing or the wrong thing to do, when really none of us know what the situation is. And going back to when we were talking about the fact that there is no hard and fast legal rule that says you must take care of a child under the age of X and that they're fine over the age of X, it's very hard for us to judge from the outside, isn't it? Although, of course, that doesn't stop the newspapers from doing so.
No. And Michael Gove's a great story, isn't he? Had it been a less prominent member of Parliament, Michael Gove is a very easy target, I think, for a newspaper at the moment.
Yeah, no, I do think that there was a big element of Gove being, as you say, an easy target, because he's already something of a hate figure, isn't he, publicly? And one thing that did strike me about the story was that all the ire, all the criticism seemed to be directed at Gove rather than his wife. Surely it was a decision they took jointly, so why shouldn't they be held equally responsible? And while there's no question he's the bigger name. It's not as if his wife, Sarah Vine, who is a Daily Mail and former Times journalist, is someone who is outside the public eye. So does it strike you as odd that for once actually it's the father who's having the responsibility pinned on him?
Yeah, I was going to say, ordinarily, in a sort of stereotypical fashion, it would be the mother that was jumped upon. I mean, I think looking back to the Madeleine McCann case, although obviously both parents have been in the spotlight, the people who have criticised them, I think more has been said of how could a mother leave her child alone, and I think there was more emphasis on Kate McCann, whereas in this case, as you say, whether it is because Michael Gove is the one that people love to hate, and so therefore he's the one that people want to attack, I don't know, but it is it's a slightly different story for it to be the father that's being looked down on. But as you say, the chances are it was a joint decision that they made, and so they take joint responsibility for it.
I think you're right there, Tim. I just think the fact that Michael Gove is a much more newsworthy story. Sarah Vine is well known, but she's nowhere near as well known as Michael Gove. And besides which, I think anybody that gets rid of modular A levels deserves all he gets.
And the other thing that did make me think was whether the fact that Sarah Vine is a journalist was maybe a case of journalists sticking together and not attacking one of their own, or is that just me being cynical?
But Gove's a bit of a journalist, isn't he? I mean, he's out covering the US election for somebody or other.
But I guess he's always a politician first, isn't he? And as you say,
absolutely.
When we talk about Michael Gove, we think about the impact that he's had on our education system and the policies that he pushed through that were, shall we say, less than popular. Again, maybe this is me being cynical, but I do wonder if the story would even have materialised if it hadn't involved a public enemy number one figure like Michael Gove, and if it had been someone more likeable, say Tess Daly and Vernon Kay. Somehow I don't see that being a big story in the same way that this was.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, I think I've got to agree with you there. I think whatever Michael Gove does, it becomes newsworthy at the moment, doesn't it?
It does, doesn't it? And I have to admit that I did laugh when I read, I think it was the article in the Telegraph, which seemed to imply, or it certainly connected the fact that Gove was spotted doing some dad dancing to Blurred Lines while he was out partying, and that somehow made his alleged parental negligence worse. That he should have taken some kind of political stance against the song's misogynistic lyrics. And to be honest, I'd be a lot more worried at the prospect that pursuing this particular narrative angle now gives him a platform to follow Ed Balls and appear on next year's Strictly.
Absolutely right.
And that's a news story we definitely don't want to see. So before we wrap up, what have we been up to recently? Hannah?
It's been a bit full on. We've all had various illnesses in the house, so the last couple of weeks have been a little bit manic. But sort of looking forward to the week ahead, really, to get back to normal a little bit. And Toby's back at nursery tomorrow, and then I've got an event in London on Thursday and Blogfest on Saturday. So I'm just sort of looking ahead now, forgetting about the illness and the sleep deprivation of the last couple of weeks, and looking forward to the next week or so to come.
Absolutely, and I will see you there on Saturday. Any more progress with Apples and Pips?
Yes, it's going really well. I've got a few other brands on board. I went to the baby show with Martha a couple of weeks ago, and we got chatting to some lovely brands who are very interested in selling through the shop. So fingers crossed we'll be keep on adding new products and keep getting the orders in, especially with the build up to Christmas now. So fingers crossed it's just going to keep going up and up.
Indeed. And how about you, Mark? What have been your latest post Pennine Way adventures?
Well, am I allowed an advert here?
Of course you are.
Well, never say never, Tim, because something I never thought I would become was an app developer for the iPhone. But I've been working with a designer, and I've got an app on the iPhone now, which is the Stressed Mums sticker pack. So if you go to the iPhone store and search Stressed Mums sticker pack, everything you need to cope with life as a mum is there.
It sounds like something I need.
Right. Well, yeah. It's 79 pence, and we don't make very much out of it unless a gazillion people download it, but it's got all the stickers you need, like wine o'clock and I need gin, I need chocolate, I need cake. Man flu, obviously, for when the other half is not quite pulling his weight. So I'm absolutely delighted about that. Of course, my children are resolutely unimpressed, but there you go. I've got to tell you, I mean, Hannah, wine o'clock, it might well be quite late for you now. The older your children get, the earlier wine o'clock gets. Without
As for us, past couple of weeks we've had half term, of course, which included our traditional annual long weekend away at Butlins. So we were quite lucky, actually. We got the tail end of the mild weather, and the kids had a great time on all the fairground rides, in the arcades. Cara's clearly going to end up being one of those old women you see in casinos at 4 a.m. feeding coins endlessly into the slot machines. And carving pumpkins, all that kind of stuff. We even got to see a big fireworks display, which was a bit of a bonus, because then we squeezed in another big display closer to home on bonfire night itself. So we've had 2 sets of ear-splitting explosions this year, and I think my ears are still ringing. And that's it for another episode of the Meet the Parents podcast. We'll be back next week, but in the meantime, here's where you can find each of us online.
I am at buddingsmiles.co.uk and I'm on all social media at buddingsmiles.
Yep, I'm at bestdadicanbe.com and Twitter at bestdadicanbe.
And you can find me at slouchingtowardsthatcham.com and on Twitter at ThatchamDad. So you can download this podcast on iTunes and Android devices, on our website at meettheparentspodcast.com, and via a variety of podcasting apps. Do also please give us a follow on Twitter at Parents Podcast and Facebook at facebook.com/meettheparentspodcast. So thank you very much for listening tonight, and do please join us again next time. Good night.